Hey, it's Abdul. Welcome to the second part of the Biostats Crush course as we go into epidemiology over the next few videos, and we start today with descriptive studies. Now, just like the first part that we went as we built those foundations, those fundamentals of biostats, this section is also not that bad. It's pretty simple, it's very self-explanatory, and hopefully it'll get you some free easy marks come exam day. So in general, you can kind of broadly categorize studies into two main types. You have observational studies and then you have experimental studies. Now, the name makes sense. Experimental studies are when you experiment by doing something to someone. You're either giving patients something and giving another group something else, but you're actively doing something and modifying and playing around with patients or with your subjects or wherever it is. Observational studies are a bit different. They're more about noticing and observing and then reporting your findings. So observational studies themselves can then be further broken down into descriptive studies and analytical studies. Analytical studies are stuff like the cohort studies and case control studies, and in this type of observational study, you're actually doing some analysis, you're comparing between your two groups, and you're getting some p-values. Descriptive studies, however, are more about you describing what you see, and these come in the flavors like cross-sectional studies, ecological studies, case series, and case reports. Now, the two main questions that these two types of observational study answer, well, descriptive studies describes or answers what is happening, whilst analytical studies kind of explain the question, why is it happening? Usually through p-values and analytics and biostats, a lot of the stuff that we covered previously. If you were doing your ER rotations, you may have heard of the donut of truth, the humble CT scan. And now what I want to do is introduce to you the research NACHO, the NACHO of truth. Now, you may have seen this in different types. You may have seen this being called different things, but in general, it's a way for us to categorize the different type of studies that exist based on their quality and their risk of bias. As you go from the bottom, which are usually the lowest quality of studies, you can go all the way to the top to reach that little tip of the Dorito or the Nacho, whatever you want to call it, and that's going to be the systematic review of RCTs. This is the best level of evidence that we can have. As you go up, the quality improves and the risk of bias decreases, and the opposite is true. Now, today, as we go over descriptive studies, you'll notice that a lot of them do kind of like sit at the bottom. So that might prompt you to think that this means they are pretty useless or shouldn't be really done, but that couldn't be further away from the truth, because the true value of these kind of studies is to generate hypotheses. You generate hypotheses by these studies, and then you can test them through an analytical study if you can, or maybe even an experimental type of study. And we've discussed this previously in the previous section when we discussed hypothesis testing and statistical tests. Now let's just dive in and explore those descriptive studies in a bit more detail. Starting with the case reports and case series, which I am sure that you guys are probably very well aware. A case report is a type of study where you present an unusual presentation of a single patient. Something that was a bit bizarre. Maybe a patient that you gave a thyroid medication self-combusted and was able to fly. That's not a usual kind of reaction from antithyroid medications, so that could be a case report. Now, a case series is going to be a pooling of multiple patients with the same kind of unusual presentation, usually in combination with a literature review, so the physicians or clinicians are able to quickly understand what has been done on this topic so far. So very, very bread and butter stuff. Cross-sectional studies is where things get a bit more interesting and where you'll begin to see a bit more questions in the NBME related to these. Now, the way I want you to kind of remember cross-sectional studies is that these are really snapshots in time. These are the classic surveys that you send to a population and you measure the exposures and the outcomes, and you do that all at the very same time. The best way to understand these kind of stuff is through an example. So imagine that we send a survey to all women over the age of 50 in the city of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. And in that survey, you ask about if they have been diagnosed with osteoporosis in the past and do they drink soda. Now, what this question is really doing, what this survey is really assessing is the outcome, which in this case is osteoporosis, and the exposure, which is going to be soda consumption. Now, As you can probably tell, the most common output of a cross-sectional study is the prevalence. Now, I want to address prevalence for a bit because it can be quite confusing for some students because prevalence and incidence are these kind of concepts that you'll always get pimped on in these questions. So it's important to differentiate between the two. Now, what prevalence is, it's the total existing cases at any one specific period of time, right? If I take any population and I take a snapshot at one particular time and I ask you how many total cases are there, that is going to be your prevalence. Now, taking our study as an example, if we said that the survey found that 6,000 women have osteoporosis in Saskatoon in 2026, or during that specific time when that survey was sent, that is going to be the prevalence. The prevalence of osteoporosis in Saskatoon in that population is going to be 6,000. The incidence is going to be the number of new cases at a period of time. And immediately we notice that we are not speaking about snapshots anymore, we're speaking about periods, a duration. You're looking at the number of new cases that have propped up in that specific period. And because of that, cross-sectional studies can never tell you the incidence of a disease or the incidence of something. It can only tell you the prevalence, because in order to have the incidence, you will need to have the study conducted over a duration, which is not what cross-sectional studies do. Now, during the study, you kind of measure the exposure and outcome, and that presents us with a bit of a conundrum. What came first, the chicken or the egg type thing? The question is, what came first? Did the exposure cause the outcome, or did the outcome cause the exposure? A good example of that is in our study. Did the people who drink soda develop osteoporosis, or is it that people who have osteoporosis are more likely to drink soda? This is something that cross-sectional studies themselves can't help you, but they could generate a hypothesis, which is their point, and then you could test that with other different type of studies. So what about ecological studies? In these kind of studies, I want you to stop thinking of individuals and think of the world. An ecological study is a study that looks at population level data. We're not looking at individuals anymore, we're looking at entire populations. Very similar to cross-sectional studies in some ways, but just the unit that we're looking at is not individuals, it's population. And the best way to understand this is again through an example. Imagine that you are in the fantasy setting of Faerun in Baldur's Gate, and you decide to send a study. You send a scroll to the lords of the various districts, asking them, inquiring them about the elk meat consumption in their districts and the amount of deaths to goblins that they have per year. And that basically means that our exposure here is going to be the elk meat consumption, and our outcome is going to be deaths by goblins. So you send that scroll, and after a brief period of time, you get the answers back. So you can see on this table here, you have 5 districts and you have the data. Bloomridge has a consumption of around like 7 kg per year and 4 per 1,000 goblin deaths. And as you go through the data, you notice that, hey, it does seem like that the more elk that a district consumes, the higher the number of goblin deaths. Is it fair to say that eating elk meat will increase your risk of getting killed by a goblin? Well, not really. There's something called the ecological fallacy, which says that you cannot apply group level findings to individuals. And that's a key kind of like concept that they will repeatedly test you in NBMEs. So instead of saying eating elk meat increases your risk of dying by goblins, what you can say, and the only valid thing to say, is that districts with higher elk meat consumption tend to have higher goblin attack death rates. And now we're basically done. So a quick recap. We've kind of covered what exactly is a descriptive study and the 4 key ones that you have to know for their exam. You have case reports, which are just going to be unusual presentation of a singular patient, whilst a case series is usually pooling of multiple patients and reporting those findings. A cross-sectional study, it's that Spider-Man with a camera. It's capturing a snapshot in time. It's great to calculate the prevalence, but we cannot calculate the incidence because it's a snapshot. And then finally, ecological studies, where we're looking at group level data, we're looking at population level data, and we always have to be wary of ecological fallacy. We cannot apply our findings to individuals. And with that, we are done. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you're interested in step 2 mentoring, I have completely rehauled the application form. You can find it right under the banner, right under the YouTube channel description. So shoot me a message if you're interested. And if you want to see me apply these concepts to specific questions, to UWorld style questions, and go through them together, showing you how to solve those, then you can find those videos on my Patreon. Thank you so much for listening, and wishing you a great one, and see you in the next one.